I realize that it's a bad topic considering I'm standing in front of a principal and a bunch of teachers, but that's the topic I have to start with. Well, my education actually started in the US, right? And education over there was a breeze. The academics were like 2 plus 2 in 2nd grade, and every Indian knows complex differentiation when he's born. Well, every Indian except me, of course. That's my luck. We also had recess every day. That was fun. We could wear whatever we wanted to school. So obviously when I moved to India, it was a huge shift, right? We had this half-an-hour session in the morning called assembly, where you're slowly fried to a golden brown. That was fun. You also had to wear a uniform so that you could also feel like you were part of the Third Reich. And I think most intriguingly, when you come to 11th and 12th, there's a hierarchy when it comes to streams. So if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, I got 97% in the science stream, me and my friends would take him to a side and have a, let's say, discussion with him for around 5 minutes. He wouldn't come out of it the same way that he would walk into it. And that's pretty much because I feel that these people, they make science seem easy, which it's not. Now, if a commerce student said the same thing to me, we'd pretty much laugh at them, tell them to get out of here, because it's commerce, right? Because every science student thinks that human beings evolved from Homo erectus to Neanderthal to commerce student, and then finally to Homo sapien, right? We consider ourselves to be superior to commerce. Anyways, I do have somewhat of an experience with education, and I think the most interesting aspect of education is that it really hasn't changed since 1850, right? That was the time of the Industrial Revolution. And people don't seem to understand the gravitas of this. And let me try to put this in perspective. In 1850, people actually used to think that the best way to calm a baby, a crying baby, was to drug it with morphine. That's right. Basically, a crying baby would be punished by becoming a drug addict for the rest of its life. And now obviously views have changed, right? Being a drug addict is no longer cool. And the interesting part is that education really hasn't. And today, that's why I'm going to talk about the 4 ingredients that make education bad. The first is school. And research actually shows that school students face more restrictions than prison inmates. And think about it. You're confined to a restricted area for extended periods of time. That's classrooms. You're allowed to go outside for a limited amount of time every week, similar to what prisons do. And you need permission from higher authorities for some of the most basic things. I'm more likely to get a girlfriend than go to the bathroom twice in the same day. That's a fact in India. Everybody would agree with me on this, right? And I find this incredibly troubling because it honestly restricts a student's independence, right? And independence is essential for transitioning into the real world. And this is what schools fundamentally fail to do. And I believe the best way to actually get past this is by involving students in the decision making with the school management. Because not only does it involve students in decisions that directly affect them, it makes them more conscious of their power. It makes them more involved in social issues as they grow up. And that's something that's really required. And that's something that schools just don't seem to understand for the past 150 years. Ingredient number 2, and that's the curriculum. Now before I move on to some of the more fundamental aspects of education, I'm going to talk about curriculum. CBSE curriculum in particular. Now, CBSE is designed to cram your head with as much information as possible, right? The problem is that this information is next to you because it doesn't give you the practical applications of this information. Now, the sex education in India is constricted to around 1 paragraph in a 10th grade biology chapter. That's a fact. Now, let's consider a person who really doesn't know about this, right? And seeing the word condom is a first. Now, he wouldn't really know where to get one. he can't walk into a Reliance Fresh and ask the cashier for this. And I think this can be equated to almost all concepts across India and across the curriculum itself, right? Because when you don't give a student a practical application of the knowledge they're getting, especially in higher classes where information is more specialized, there's no point in teaching them that. In younger classes, we were taught addition, subtraction, multiplication, and that's something we do in our daily lives. That's something we do every hour. But in 12th grade, I'm learning integration by parts. I never do that, right? They give me homework, I just don't do that homework. I just don't want to see integration. And schools have to realize, the educational board has to realize that unless you give students the practical applications of that knowledge, it's useless teaching students that because it's going to leave their head as soon as they receive that information. Secondly, subjects in CBSE. Now, let's take maths for an example. So maths is a standard across both science stream and the commerce stream. And now the science stream is geared towards engineering, while the commerce stream is geared towards, let's say, being an accountant or an economist. Now obviously the math that you would require for both these streams is fundamentally very different. But the math that we receive is standard across both streams. And I feel that this is a problem. Because a large portion of the math that we're being taught is actually useless for our future. And in my opinion, subjects should be complementary to whatever stream you're pursuing, rather than being a standard across all streams. Because that makes learning more efficient and effective. Now, ingredient number 3. This is something I like to call soft skills, right? It refers to stuff like leadership and creativity and innovation. Now, if I'd ask anybody in this room why they think people like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk are where they are right now, you'd all say it's because they're leaders, it's because they innovate. You focus on their intangibles, basically, right? None of you are going to say, oh, he was a topper in 10th class, guaranteed superstar right now. Obviously not. And I think schools just don't focus on these intangibles. And this is across the world. This isn't limited to just India. And a huge portion of that problem is caused by how mistakes are graded nowadays, right? We consider mistakes to be wrong, but does that have to be the case, right? As we grow older, whenever we make mistakes, they're judged more harshly. And so we simply try to avoid making mistakes. And by that, we simply try to avoid taking a chance. And if you do not take a chance, you cannot be creative. You cannot innovate. And that's something that people just don't seem to realize. For example, let's say that you have that assembly period, right? And somebody comes up to the stage and they're talking and they forget their lines in the middle. Now, 99% of the time, they're just going to stand there with an open mouth, like they've been tased from the behind. They could have just said anything and gotten it over with. 90% of that assembly wouldn't even realize. But they don't, simply because they don't want to take a chance. And I think the best example for this is college essays, right? Now, for whoever's applying abroad, college essays are always an incident in their life followed by some worldly advice, right? And that's something I've noticed with my friends as well. And if you read their essays, you think that they're on the path to becoming Gandhi or Mandela, and they're not. They're morons. They truly are, right? But if you observe, there's always a common path. Nobody really deviates from this. And I remember reading a story of a guy who got into Stanford. And for one of his college proms, he wrote Black Lives Matter 100 times for the prompt, what matters to you the most? Now obviously my friends were blown away. They're like, man, this guy gave the system. This was truly special answer. But I disagree, right? This answer could have gone both ways. Whoever graded it could have disagreed with this completely, disagreed with that approach. And he wouldn't have gotten in, obviously. But he did take that chance. And I believe this was probably the main reason why he got into Stanford. Because he was willing to take a risk, and the person evaluating this actually understood that. And this is something we just don't do nowadays. And this is something that has to change. Ingredient number 4, that's education. And a lot of people, there's a lot of science when it comes to education. A lot of this has to do with the methodologies in measuring growth or scholastic achievement. But my contention is that all these sides are wrong because they fundamentally misunderstand the problem. The problem is with the system itself, not with the methodologies. Today we have what I call a top-down level of teaching, right? Basically the teacher is the source of information and he or she distributes it to the students. And then the students
hopefully use that in their lives. It won't happen, but let's say it's hypothetical. Now, I believe that we do not take into account one major innovation, the internet. See, on the internet, there are no teachers, right? You have Google or Wikipedia, but that's the collective sum of human knowledge, right? Information is distributed laterally, right? There's a lateral dissemination of information. And I believe education has not allowed technology and this lateral dissemination of information to disrupt it properly. I'll give you an example of what I mean by lateral dissemination of information. Let's say that a teacher breaks up a class into different groups, gives each group a subtopic, which has an overarching theme, and says, come back the next day with information. And this has happened to me. It's happened to a lot of students in CBSE. It's called projects or whatever, right? Now, I honestly feel the best learning is done when different students engage in the conversation, right? They move from being passive recipients of education to active participants, and that's a key difference. For example, TOK classes in IB. Now, I know TOK classes is a big joke, at least to my friends, but the concept itself is sound, right? It focuses on turning students into active participants in the discussion. And the same thing happens when the teacher divides the class, right? The teacher is now a facilitator of the flow of information, not the provider. And that's something that has to be taken into account. Now, obviously, I don't have a lot of solutions, right? I can't fry an egg without burning my hands and getting the yolk on the ceiling. But I am smart enough to realize that there is a problem, right? There's a problem when cutoffs at DU are 100%, right? Since when did getting 95% make you a bad student? And I believe that education has to be fundamentally revamped. Now, people might argue saying that, well, people like Satya Nadella and Sundar Pichai, well, they're all products of the Indian educational system. But my contention is that these people are not a product, but rather they succeeded in spite of the education system, not because of it. And this is not going to change unless we do something about it, right? It's not going to change unless
people who form this educational policy, they start taking a chance as well. Thank you.